Okay, let's unpack this. When you think mammoths, I bet you picture those huge, woolly, shaggy ones, right? Built for the cold. But the mammoth world, it turns out, was way more varied. And their evolution, definitely more complicated than we usually think. Today we're doing a deep dive into this really fascinating scientific study. It's shaking up how we see one particular species, the Columbian mammoth. These were, less furry, lived in more temperate spots across North America, even down to Central America. And for ages, their story, their evolution has been kind of murky. Lots of conflicting genetic data.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a puzzle, and what's really remarkable about this new study is how the researchers managed to get ancient DNA out of bones from Mexico. That's a warm, humid place exactly where DNA usually just falls apart super quickly. So their findings aren't just filling in a map gap, geographically speaking, they're actually making us rethink how we even define these mammoth species. And fascinatingly, maybe even giving us clues about their social lives.
Right. So our mission today, dig into these, well, kind of weird genetic secrets they found down in Mexico. We want to figure out what it means for the whole mammoth family tree and why this study is such a big deal for understanding ancient animals in warmer places. Get ready for some aha moments, I think. Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. Mammoths in North America. Generally, we talk about a few main types. The Eurasian steppe mammoth, the woolly mammoth, it's the Arctic specialist, and then this one, the Columbian mammoth, Mammoths columbi, only found in North America. And like you said, most genetic work before this, it focused on animals from colder spots where DNA just lasts longer.
Exactly. That's a really key point. For years, the Columbian mammoth was this genetic enigma. If you looked at its nuclear DNA, the main genetic blueprint in the cell nucleus, it looked like a hybrid. A mix of an old steppe mammoth line, the Christofka one, and woolly mammoths. That mix probably happened way back, early Middle Pleistocene, maybe 800,000 to 400,000 years ago.
Okay, so nuclear DNA says hybrid.
But then you look at the mitochondrial DNA, the mtDNA, that stuff's only passed down from the mother. And that DNA told a completely different story. It suggested Columbian mammoths had a separate origin, not directly from woolly mammoths in that way.
Huh. So two sets of DNA, two different stories, leaves a big question mark, right?
A massive one, yeah. Over their true evolutionary path.
And those earlier studies, they were mostly using bones from, say, Canada, the U.S., where Columbian and woolly mammoths might have actually met.
Precisely, colder areas where they overlapped. But Columbian mammoths, their range went much further south, into Central America.
Which brings us to the big question.
What about those southern populations? The ones living in, well, effectively tropical latitudes. The huge problem, as we mentioned, is DNA just doesn't survive well in heat and humidity. And that's why this particular scientific study is so important. This collaboration, Mexican and European researchers, they specifically went looking for usable DNA in bones from the basin of Mexico. That's way south of where you'd ever expect to find a woolly mammoth.
Okay, so a really challenging environment for DNA. But they had a couple of things going for them, right? Despite the heat.
They did, yeah. First, just the sheer number of bones.
Right. You mentioned the airport construction.
Exactly. The basin of Mexico, it's been heavily developed, so tons of mammoth remains have turned up over the years. But that Mexico City airport project between 2019 and 2022, incredible. They uncovered remains from over 100 individual mammoths.
Wow, over 100. That's like a mammoth graveyard just waiting there. An amazing resource.
An unparalleled resource. And second, they made a really smart strategic choice. They focused on getting mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA.
Why mtDNA specifically?
Well, okay, it doesn't give you the whole ancestry picture like nuclear DNA does, but the advantage is quantity. Each cell has hundreds of these little mitochondria, and each mitochondrion has dozens of copies of its own little genome.
Ah, so way more copies than the single nuclear genome per cell.
Exactly. So even if most of it degrades, your chances of finding some surviving detectable mtDNA are much, much higher, especially in tough conditions like Mexico.
Makes sense. Did it work?
It did. They managed to get 61 new mitochondrial genomes out of 83 samples they tried. And 28 of those were high enough quality for really detailed analysis.
That sounds like a huge success, considering the circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. A real breakthrough for this kind of environment.
Okay, so they got the DNA. This is where it gets really interesting, right? What did this Mexican mammoth DNA tell them?
So the researchers basically built a big mammoth family tree. They took their new data and plugged it in alongside all the existing data from woolly and other Columbian mammoths. And one thing popped out right away. The mammoths from the basin of Mexico. They formed their own distinct genetic group, a cluster. They called it Clade 1G. A clade is just, a branch on the evolutionary tree, a group sharing a common ancestor.
Clade 1G, so all the Mexican samples were closely related to each other.
More closely related to each other than to any other mammoths, woolly or Columbian, found anywhere else. It points to like a deep local population history there.
Okay, a unique Mexican mammoth signature. But you mentioned earlier it was weird. What was weird about it?
Right. The weird part comes when you place clade 1G on the bigger mammoth family tree. Its position was really unexpected. It showed up as a sister group, sort of like a cousin to both the North American woolly mammoths, which are clade 1C, and the other Columbian mammoths from further north, clade 1F.
Wait, sister to both. How does that work?
Exactly. And it gets weirder. Some of those northern Columbian mammoths from Canada and the US, genetically, based on this mtDNA, they were actually closer to woolly mammoths than they were to these Columbian mammoths down in Mexico.
Hold on. So, where a mammoth lived was a better predictor of its mtDNA than what species we called it. Like, a Columbian mammoth in Canada might be genetically closer to a woolly mammoth next door than to another Columbian mammoth way down in Mexico.
You got it. That strong link between geography and mtDNA kind of overriding the species label, that's the anomaly. That's not how we usually expect genetics to work.
Yeah, that definitely twists the family tree into a pretzel. So how do they explain that?
Well, the researchers put forward two main ideas. Hypothesis one, maybe Columbian mammoth wasn't one single species that spread out. Maybe it was the result of multiple separate hybridization events happening in different places.
So different groups of steppe mammoths and woolly mammoths interbred here and then maybe again over there, creating these sort of similar-looking but genetically distinct hybrid populations we lump together as Columbian.
Exactly. Creating these somewhat isolated hybrid populations, less of a single species, more of a genetic mosaic.
Okay, that's one possibility. A mosaic was the alternative.
The alternative, and this is the one the researchers seem to lean towards, partly based on dating the divergence times, is that the original woolly mammoth population that came into North America already had a whole bunch of different mitochondrial lineages within it. Lots of pre-existing diversity. So if that diverse woolly mammoth population then hybridized with steppe mammoths to create the first Columbian mammoths, some of that original mtDNA diversity would just get carried over into the new hybrid population. Depending on which woolly mammoth individuals were involved in the hybridization in different areas, you could end up with these geographically structured mtDNA patterns later on.
So either multiple independent mixing events or one big mixing event involving already diverse ingredients leading to this geographic pattern later.
Pretty much. Either way, it points to a much more, let's say, fluid and complex genetic history than the simple species A plus species B equals species C idea we might have had before. It's genetically quite unusual.
Absolutely fascinating. Okay, so the genetics are complex, maybe even messy.
Yeah.
Did this study tell us anything else? Like about the mammoths themselves, how they lived, population sizes, social stuff?
Yes, they did look into that too. By dating the samples, they confirmed these Basin of Mexico mammoths, this clade 1G, were living towards the end of the line for mammoths. Late Pleistocene, roughly 40,000 down to about 12,700 years ago. And they used a neat statistical technique, Bayesian skyline analysis. It lets you sort of estimate how the effective population size changed over time.
Effective population size.
Yeah.
It's like the number of breeding individuals, right? A measure of genetic health.
Exactly. And what they found was pretty striking. These Columbian mammoths in North America, both the New Mexican group, clade 1G.1, and the northern group, clade 1F, their effective population size seems to have been remarkably stable over the last 40,000 years they existed.
Stable, even through things like the peak of the last ice age.
Apparently, yes. Which is really interesting when you compare them to the Eurasian woolly mammoths, clade 1DE. Those guys went through a massive population crash, a real bottleneck, starting around 20,000 years ago after the last glacial maximum hit its peak.
Wow, so the North American Columbian mammoths were much more resilient, demographically speaking, during those big climate shifts.
It certainly looks that way based on this analysis, a really different population trajectory compared to their Eurasian woolly cousins.
That's a huge difference. Okay, what about social life? We hear about elephants living in female-led groups, matriarchal societies, and males often wander off alone. Didn't some older fossil finds suggest something similar for mammoths, like finding more male skeletons in natural traps, as if lone males were more likely to fall in?
That's right. That interpretation has been out there based on some sites showing a bias towards male fossils. But this study actually molecularly sexed the mammoth remains from the Basin of Mexico. They figured out if each bone came from a male or a female.
And what do they find?
They found an equal number of males and females, a roughly 50-50 split.
Really? Equal numbers. So not the male bias seen elsewhere. What does that mean?
Well, it suggests these specific fossil sites in Mexico might be different. Maybe they're preserving entire social groups, not just, unlucky solitary males stumbling into traps.
Ah, so maybe we're seeing a snapshot of the whole herd, mares and females together.
It's a definite possibility. It could mean different social behavior in these southern populations, or maybe just the way these particular animals died and got preserved captured a more complete picture of the group structure. Either way, it really highlights again how important it is to look at samples from different geographic areas. You can get different insights.
Absolutely. So pulling it all together, what's the big takeaway here? What does this study really mean for how we study ancient animals?
I think connecting it to the bigger picture, it's a powerful, powerful demonstration that we need wider geographical sampling. It's just too easy to make broad assumptions when all your data comes from one type of environment, like cold regions. By managing to get this ancient DNA from a tropical latitude, these researchers basically proved it's possible. It opens the door to studying megafauna in places we previously thought were maybe lost causes for ancient DNA.
Like unlocking whole new chapters of evolutionary history that were hidden by climate.
Exactly. It means we can potentially understand how species evolved and adapted across their entire range, not just in the places where preservation is easy. It's a huge boost for paleogenomics in warmer climates.
It really feels like finding missing puzzle pieces that just change the whole picture you thought you had.
That's a great way to put it. And while the study gave us amazing insights from the mitochondrial DNA, it also, really underscores that we still need nuclear DNA to get the full, super detailed story. Nuclear DNA would tell us even more about the ancestry, the exact mix and hybrids, the relationships.
But that's much harder to get from these warm climate bones.
Much harder, yeah. It degrades even faster. So the challenge now is either to find exceptionally well-preserved samples, maybe even in northern areas that haven't been studied this way, or to keep pushing the technology, refining the methods to pull usable nuclear DNA out of really degraded stuff. This study sort of paves the way, showing what's possible, but there's definitely more work to be done to get the complete genetic blueprint.
What an absolutely incredible deep dive. Seriously fascinating. From bones under an airport to completely redrawing the mammoth family tree, or at least making it much more complex. This scientific study has really turned our understanding of the Columbian mammoth on its head. It's just such a great reminder that the past can always surprise you, especially if you look in places people haven't looked closely before.
It truly is, and it shows that those lines we draw between species, sometimes they were much more fuzzy, more fluid in the past than our neat categories suggest. The Columbian mammoth story isn't just about one species anymore. It's about this dynamic dance of migration and mixing and adapting across a huge continent. It's a much richer history.
And it all kicked off because they were building an airport.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so here's something for you, our listeners, to chew on after this deep dive. If ancient DNA can survive and spill secrets like this in the warmth of Mexico, think about all the other challenging environments around the globe. Jungles, deserts, other warm regions. What hidden histories of other extinct giants might be locked away there, just waiting for us to find the key? And what could those stories teach us about how life really adapts, survives, and changes on this planet? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging for those nuggets of knowledge.